Roll call, please.
Ms. McGuire.
Here.
Mr. Palmer.
Here.
Mr. Gieske.
Here.
Mr. Cummings, absent. Mr. Nordine here. Mr. Byer.
Here.
Mr. Weed, absent.
In the absence of our supervisor, we need to appoint a chairperson for the meeting, so I would entertain any nominations at this time.
I would nominate your honorable self. Okay?
I'll support that.
All right. Talk about a railroad job.
Yeah, no kidding. I hear the train coming.
Well, we need a vote.
Roll call?
All right. Ms. McGuire.
Yes.
Mr. Palmer.
Yes.
Mr. Byer.
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Gieske.
Yes.
Okay, looks like I'm running the show tonight. Next on the agenda is agenda additions, and does anybody have any agenda additions?
No.
No? Okay, I have one change to the agenda. Tonight we won't be having a closed session. The attorney is not feeling well, so we're canceling that. So, if that's okay with everybody for the addition, all in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Agenda's carried. Okay. Next up, we're gonna just continue. Next up is public comment. I just want a reminder, everybody has 4 minutes, and we have 2 public comments. The first one, you need to submit a card to the superintendent or to Ann over there. If you want to speak, you have 4 minutes to do so. The timer's up there, so you can kind of keep an eye on it, so you don't want to miss out anything that you wanted to talk about. The second one, you still have 4 minutes, but you don't need a card to talk. So do we have any cards tonight?
We do. We have a few. First would be from Larry Holland, who would like to talk about ordinance review, discretion, and ambiguous language.
Okay. Please introduce yourself and your address when you speak.
My name is Larry Holland, and I'm representing the official interests of 3LRT LLC at 5226 North US 23, Oscoda, Michigan, 48750. The first thing that I just want to premise is that you can thank Mr. Byer for this tonight, because he was my history and government teacher.
This better be good.
That taught me everything that I know today. So the first thing is that I want to commend the board on section 9.5 for application requirements for that particular ordinance. It properly, under section 2, spells out the items that are supposed to be included on an application, and it provides for the limitation of discretion if any public official is going to be collecting and or enforcing these ordinances. The application requirements under 2C says a signed statement that the applicant is the owner of the subject parcel or is acting as the owner's representative, and that's where it stops. Earlier this year, I received a home occupancy, building and business reoccupancy special land use permit site plan review application, which is quite the mouthful, which actually isn't covered under any ordinance with that title. However, if you spell out special land use permit, you'll see that the terms are listed underneath 9.5. When I received a copy of a warning letter and a copy of this form, I refused to sign a section of it for good reason, because it doesn't comply with any of the ordinances. It says, I am the owner of the above property or am acting officially on the owner's behalf, which is good, but then it continues. And consent to the township staff and or any township official permission to access this property to review the facts regarding the nature of this request. Mr. Byer taught me under 4th Amendment that nobody can search my property without a search warrant, but yet I'm being forced potentially to sign a form that circumvents that. And I probably wouldn't have had the red flag raised except the warning letter that I received was on Oscoda Township Police Department letterhead. And to my knowledge, the Oscoda Police Department is also staff of the township. So inadvertently, some of the ordinances not only have a huge amount of ambiguous language, but it goes outside the scope of what covers the narrow intent of any specific ordinance, which you can see just with the first form. I get shortcuts. Mr. Byer taught me the shortcut was good. I only had to read the first paragraph on every paragraph of the chapter to pass my test. So I did that. However, I also struggled to read through the entire ordinance book, and then I started pointing out with specificity, by what authority is the township acting? What is the compelling state interest, or in this case, the compelling township interest? And then, what is the least restrictive means in implementing that particular ordinance before it starts to trump on particular rights, whether it be the Fourth Amendment or any other right that I have, due process, on and on, free speech. So, when I received my warning letter, it says, "No land heretofore vacant shall hereafter be used, or an existing use of land be hereafter changed to a use of different class or type, unless a land use permit is first obtained for the new or different use." I understand all the language in there. From what I understand, at 5226 North US 23 has been there for 18 years. And the occupancy permit was properly filed. I went back and checked, and so the zoning enforcement officer, because they first were looking at ordinance 7.4.3, which covers reuse of an existing building, which hinges on the fact that an occupancy permit is required from Oscoda County. So we want to offer up that we need to kind of take a look at our ordinances. I understand that you guys can't do anything about this particular situation, but we need to look at that to bring it in a little bit, and I'm certainly able
Thanks,
to
Larry.
help.
Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you.
Sounds like you were way too easy.
Do we have any other cards?
We do. Arnie LaRich would like to talk about franchise fee, and a little trouble discerning his writing. Sorry, Arnie.
What was that?
I say a little trouble discerning your writing, but
Oh, sorry about that. Arnie LaRich, Westwood Drive, Oscoda, and it's going to be real quick. Last meeting, you talked about, and in the minutes that you're going to be voting on, accepting or modifying tonight from that meeting, you talked about the franchise fee and so forth, and then made a decision on the amount, and the fee amount. There was discussion of the a draft or a estimate by MICTV, and then there was discussion of the 3%. That draft or estimate that was talked about is not mentioned in the minutes, and when you look at the amounts of the costs in that estimate, at least we verbally heard what the estimate was, that's basically about 2.5%. So a good chunk of the 3% is for that. Not against that. It's just, I just think there were other places in the minutes and the discussion where it was discussed that other specific uses, without too much specificity added to that, but it mentioned that in the minutes. But there's very little amount of money left over in that 3%. So just thought it'd be a good thing for transparency for whatever discussions or use of that estimate were, how much of it was based on just that one estimate, or are there other specific uses that the money could be used for? And there was some discussion. I had mentioned one potential use of that, but that specific recommendation was not mentioned. It was just, I made a comment. So there's very little in the history for the public to, and people who were not listening, the cable people who were not listening that night, to know what the discussion really was about. So it's basically suggesting that you add a sentence or two that there is a document. Don't know if it's a publicly available document, that estimate that was made, because I think it was mentioned it was draft, so it may not be final, but still a draft with proper annotation could still be made public if it was used in a significant way for a decision. That's it.
Thank you, Arnie. Arnie, I believe in that discussion about the franchise fee, we talked about kicking it to a work session actually and talking about it, discussing a little bit more, if I remember correctly. I'm pretty sure that's what the discussion was.
My recollection is settled on 3%. franchise fee and discuss at the budget work session
Right.
what that would be earmarked for.
Right. And we, took all those into consideration, what was brought up.
Mhm.
Bob, do we have any other cards?
We do not.
Okay.
Sure.
We have one more?
We do indeed.
As a matter of fact.
Percentage of franchise fees.
Hi, I just wanted to tell Mr. Larish, our estimate is actually only for 1.5%. When we sat down and were given the numbers that would be coming in, our budget that we first submitted as a sample and our budget that we set at our board meeting and came up with only amounts to 1.5%. So I just want to make sure that was duly noted in the record. Thank you.
Thank you.
And for the record, that is, the 1.5 is new since the draft report, correct? I mean, that's the first I've heard of the 1.5 recommendation.
Yes, sir, our estimate was actually 2%.
Okay.
And so after sitting down, we had a meeting last Tuesday night, this past Tuesday, and we spent probably 4.5 hours going over all of our various programs, all of our various needs, and was able to bring it in at 1.5%.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I just quickly clarify? My main comment is, there were no specifics in the minutes to kind of say what.
What the, okay.
Oh, right, that's why I came up,
It's not
Ronnie.
the numbers that I was.
No, I understand. I just want to make sure everybody who's either watching this or follows it in the paper or wherever, they realize that, we are not trying, thank you for the franchise fees to start with, but we certainly do not want to appear to be grabbing, so to speak, the lion's share of them. And so that's why we did spend as long as we did in our meeting to say, look, do we really need this? Do we really need this? And we started out with X and ended up with Z and then came to Q and settled on Q.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, J.D.
Okay, which brings us to the consent agenda, talking about approval of minutes. We've got the approval of minutes for the work session meeting on the 7th and the regular meeting on the 10th. Anybody have a question or comment about those? I would like to add to the minute meetings, under that charter local franchise fee, that was my motion. And if we could add that it will be discussed at the budget work session, that would be great.
All right.
And if I can just add, my understanding from 2 weeks ago was that number one is that if we were going to charge franchise fees, we were going to earmark special projects that
Right.
we don't do presently.
Right, that's pretty much in the minutes
Yeah.
too. Not in my
And-
motion, but it
yeah.
is in the discussion.
And secondly, it can be multiple things,
Right.
So if JD is talking about 1% for TV coverage and so forth, then maybe we've got some other things that we would also like to do. I didn't think we confined ourselves to one thing.
No.
Not that he's
No.
implying that.
No,
but-
no, no, and that's, I guess, part of the ambiguity is there was general discussion about potential uses, but
Yeah,
that was then tabled till the work session, so that was
Right.
the mindset.
Right.
I agree, there was not much,
Well, wasn't the gist of the idea was that we want to have a top-rated PEG channel?
Right.
And there's expenses involved, and we want to make sure that, those expenses over time, it's going to be a 10-year contract, that we can cover those costs. And
Right.
the franchise fee was a way to do that, plus any additional money we could use for other types of things.
Education.
and the draft document was mentioned, but not, it wasn't explicitly said that the 3% directly related to the 2% recommended,
Right.
at least from my perception. 3% was settled on with a number of factors, not just that draft document.
Right.
and I was pushing for 5 years. Now, you guys may know that, board members, but I just learned today that 5 years is not possible. It's got to be 10. So thank you for researching that. So.
You're welcome.
Okay, any other questions on the minutes? How about under finance? Any payment of bills? Looks like, we've got quite a chunk of change there for this 2 weeks. Not a lot of bills to sign, but it was a lot of big money. for sure. Under reports, we also have Bob's discussing the exploration trail. So if there's no other questions or comments, I'll be looking for a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
And that motion includes to add the discussion about the board, the discussion at the work session about the budget that you mentioned?
Yes.
Add that to the minutes?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So the county commission okayed the exploration trail agreement 4-1, is that right?
They did, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I have a motion to accept the consent agenda.
Second.
And you did? Okay.
I will.
Okay. Motion by Mr. Palmer, support by Mr. Nordine. Roll call, please.
Mr. Gasky? Yes. Ms. McGuire?
Yes.
Mr. Byer?
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Palmer?
Yes.
Did I say yes? Did you call me?
I did.
Okay, just checking. Okay, moving on, subcommittee reports and project updates. Does any of the committees have an update? I see we have one from the community center later on in the agenda, so we can just wait for that one. Okay, under reports, we'll go to Bob.
Okay, first action item deals with the County Parks and Recreation Commission involving potential establishment of a snowmobile trailhead agreement for Ratliff Park. I was recently contacted by a representative of the county indicating that the agreement that had been in place was set to expire or had expired. I don't remember the exact date, frankly, but it was not long ago. And we've had an agreement in place with them for several years where we extend year to year. And the concern was that there are grant funds involved with trail grooming, and it's important to have an agreement in place for each of the locations' trailheads that have been established. Unfortunately, we had done the last extension to the original agreement, so in response to the concern, we updated that agreement, basically inserted new dates, et cetera, sent it down to the county. The County Parks and Recreation Commission has now approved the document, which, like the original, provides for 4 extension periods beyond the original term, so it can be a 5-year agreement. We have the signed agreement, and approvals being sought for the supervisor and clerk to execute that operating agreement. And that, of course, is based on the assumption we wish to continue having the snowmobile trailhead at Ratliff Park. I should note also that the original agreement, going way back, had 2 other facilities that were part of it, McQuaig Park and the Footsite Fire Barn, both of which have since been sold. So we're down to 1.
Okay, any discussion?
I was just wondering, I happened to see that the agreement would be effective July 1st. Is there some reason that we didn't get to this earlier or have some notification from the county, or did it just somebody's oversight?
I believe it was an oversight. It was one of those
Okay,
after-the-fact matters.
yeah. And also it calls for them carrying a pretty substantial insurance policy. Have we ever confirmed that they have that insurance?
We did get a copy of the insurance certificate following the discussion Friday.
Okay. Okay. And we will collect our dollar. Right?
I'll make sure.
Okay.
Okay, any other discussion? Is there a motion?
Yes, I will so move that the supervisor and clerk execute the operating agreement as previously approved by the County Parks and Recreation Commission.
Okay, motion by Byer, support by Mr. Gieske. Roll call, please.
Mr. Byer?
Yes.
Ms. McGuire?
Yes.
Mr. Palmer?
Yes.
Mr. Gasky?
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes.
Motion is passed. Next.
Thank you. Reference was made earlier to the Community Center Advisory Committee, and the group has been meeting in furtherance of developing some recommendations. I have this evening the first recommendations that are going to be coming from the group. I expect more in the future at some point. You might recall that one of the key focal points for the group when we formed it was to look at extending the seasons. And the idea there is to accommodate some of the user groups and make better use of the facility in terms of sort of hitting the peak use periods. The one recommendation from the group involves that specific idea, and in particular would have us opening 2 weeks earlier in October and closing 3 weeks later in May. When the analysis was done, the group looked at peak patron assistance times and tried to revise the existing schedule, the schedule we've had for many years, such that this was going to be a cost-neutral outcome in terms of the total hours of operation. And you'll note in looking at the numbers that it is very close. It was pointed out during our work session that the numbers might be off a little bit, but nonetheless, there's a very, very close parallel between the old operating schedule, total hours, and the revision. So in theory, it should be cost neutral or minimal cost, and we'd want to look at that if we opted to proceed in the future. And I should indicate the group put a fair amount of time and effort into that, amongst other things, and thank them for their efforts in that regard. They also felt that an updated and revised mission statement and a vision statement would be helpful in trying to clarify the direction that the facility is going and what we're trying to do there on behalf of the community. And I think that's in furtherance of the idea that we will be marketing and trying to conduct outreach to the community to get more participation in the community center in the next several months. So those would be the items for the board's consideration this evening: the extended schedule and the mission and vision statements.
Any discussion on the extended schedule?
Are the pickleballers happy with the extra 5 weeks?
I'm not sure exactly how to respond to that. No,
Yes or no?
I don't think it's that simple, with all due respect. The group hasn't taken a position, is what I would say. We have pickleball representation
On the committee?
on the committee, but there have also been expressions of a desire for year-round operation in the past. So I would expect to some extent the answer would be dependent on who you talk to, frankly.
Any other comments?
Well, I'd just like to thank the committee for their work on this, and I did, at our meeting Friday, I pointed out where I had a little discrepancy with the hours. If you look at November, in the schedule, it talks about taking out 2 12-hour days, which, according to the numbers, the total hours of 328, that would only be 1 12-hour day. So if you took 2 out, it'd be 316 hours. And if you total that up, it comes, our hours under the 2016 season was 2,332. With revising the schedule, with the extra 4.5 weeks, it makes it 2,334. So we get 4.5 extra weeks and only 2 extra hours of coverage. So I think that's a pretty good turnaround for extending the season. It doesn't extend our revenue in terms of additional hours. And that basically is reducing it from a 13-hour day to a 12-hour day, with some adjustments in those extension periods for, not being open on Sunday. But I think those are very fair trade-offs. And, the push by a lot of people in the community was to have a year-round community center. And I think what this points to is that if people work on this and come up with some ideas, that actually could be achieved. We've extended it 4.5 weeks at virtually no expense. So I applaud the committee and hope they'll continue to work on this. And maybe do some marketing and bring some more revenue in, and hopefully, at some time and date, we can have a year-round community center would be my hope. So I think this is a good step in that direction. So.
I want to thank the committee also, because I'm sure that was no easy undertaking, trying to figure all those hours out and try to make up time. My only concern with extending the time into the springtime, it really does cut into Old Orchard Park and their operations out there. And I would like to make sure that we take the time to evaluate Al's input in the springtime when that does roll around again, to see what kind of effects that's having when they are trying to get the park open, because that's a huge undertaking every year, especially when the seasonal people are rolling in and out of there. So I hope we take that into consideration moving forward.
I think it's important too to analyze for every month or period of time that we stay open that we haven't in the past, to take a look at the attendance, see if it's worthwhile to keep it open, see if people are using it. I think it's critical that everything we do from this point out, in my opinion, stays cost neutral. I don't want to go too much further down the rabbit hole with expense at the community center. So I think it's important that things that we do improve efficiency. And so in that regard, I'm happy to see what the committee's come up with here. I know it's a tough decision to have to cut any hours and who you take from and what area, what groups use different hours. Cutting the evenings and Sundays does make me does raise some red flags for me with availability to children and working people, specifically children. But like I said, I know it's a tough decision. But I would like to make it as marketable to younger people as possible.
And Bob, would you, you have, what, daily meetings with Al, or
Not necessarily daily, but several times a week.
several
usually.
times a week? At this time, before we open 2 weeks early in October, caution him to, in keeping with what John's saying, is to keep pretty good records that we can look at the end of the year. Attendance and just any facet of this new change, so.
Will do.
Any other discussion?
All I can say is I'm on the committee, and for every question that was raised here tonight, we're looking extremely close at every option here. So it's not gonna be going away, it's gonna be getting tighter.
I appreciate it.
So you guys can take that and go with that.
Okay, is there a motion?
I'll make the motion, we approve the advised, operation hours at the community center for 2017-18, fall of 2017, spring of 2018.
Support.
Okay, motion by Mr. Gajewski, support by Mr. Byer. Roll call, please.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Ms. McGuire?
Yes.
Mr. Byer?
Yes.
Mr. Palmer?
Yes.
Mr. Gajewski?
Yes.
Motion's passed. Second part of this is the vision statement. Does anybody have any discussion about that?
Who are going to be the authors of this mission statement and vision statement? The committee?
Yeah, this came primarily from committee members, with some input from staff, but basically there were a couple committee members who took it upon themselves to frame the mission and the vision statement, but it was endorsed by the group.
It's in the board packet. I don't know if you had a chance to see that. Any other discussion? I know the needs and different things change when people have a vision statement, so of course this needs to change a little bit too, so I think they did a good job in trying to incorporate everything they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, it needs to be updated periodically, just like all of our other things that we have.
Okay, any other discussion? A motion?
Are we considering the vision statement only or vision and mission right now?
I'm sorry, vision and mission. I'll make a motion that we move forward with the changes to the vision and mission statement as presented by the committee.
Support.
Motion by McGuire, support by Mr. Palmer. Roll call, please.
Mr. Gasky,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire.
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes.
Motion is passed. On to the next.
Next, we have the Old Orchard Park Boat Launch Project. Two subtopics here, construction administration services with our engineer and also a contract agreement. In terms of the construction administration, the Spicer Group, you might recall, was hired to provide services related to the boat launch renovation project. I've provided a copy of their contract agreement and a list of the work elements that we had staked out when the contract was executed. We had set aside a budget of $4,000, or established a budget of $4,000 for contract administration, but it was going to be billed on an hourly basis, unlike the other components of the project, which were in the lump sum cost of $15,400. We've now reached the point where we are ready to proceed with construction administration services, and actually, the project manager lapsed into that somewhat when he put together the bid tabulation. They tell me that they're about $1,000 into that $4,000 budget. So, at a minimum, my thought was that we should get their assistance in putting together a contract document, because that would incorporate the specifications, the RFP, et cetera, in addition to the basic agreement itself. The cost to do that is $350, but you'll note, when they gave me that quote, there were several other items related to construction administration that would still need to be performed, some of which would appear, at least from my perspective, to benefit from the involvement of the engineer. At the same time, the attorney for the township has put together a contract agreement using our standard form, which would be substituted for the standard form in the documents which the engineer prepared. It would be incorporated again with specifications, the RFP, the bid response, all those things, and I've attached a draft copy of that contract agreement. It should be in near final form. A similar contract for a different project was reviewed by the contractor, just to make sure that they had some familiarity with our form. So at this point, we believe they will be amenable to it.
So, all told, it's my suggestion that we consider engaging Spicer to help us conclude the project, including construction administration services, which again, were budgeted at $4,000, of which we're committed arguably for about $1,000. I think they'd probably be flexible on that if we made issue of it, but they did provide the services. If we were to proceed on that basis, it would be staff's intent to try and minimize cost where we have an opportunity in terms of looking at something, taking a picture, sending it back to the engineer, et cetera. But in the final analysis, the thought is that we're going to have spent well over $100,000 on this project. It would seem advisable to ensure that it is ultimately built in compliance with specifications and the design, et cetera, which would be the role to a large extent the engineer would play. Also, approval would be sought for the contract agreement with the understanding that if there were any changes made necessary through discussion with the contractor or the engineer, that would be acceptable as long as they were okay with the attorney. So on that basis, I'm suggesting we proceed and hopefully we'll be moving forward and completing the project here in the near future.
Okay, any discussion?
Yeah,
$4,000 max?
That's what was in the budget, yes. We could structure it so it's a not to exceed.
That's what I'd like to see.
With them having used up 1,000 of that on the bid tab already, in your opinion, do you think 4,000 is enough?
They did not indicate otherwise, and we
Okay.
had that discussion, so
Okay,
that would be
good.
my assumption.
Very good.
dumb story that's kind of related to this. I was out of town quite a bit recently, and I called a friend of mine here in town and asked him, what's going on? What's the news items? And he said, I didn't indicate state, local, whatever. And he said, Spicer just up and quit. He just walked away. Spicer walked away. And I'm thinking, holy man, we're in the middle of projects with them and so forth. He was talking about the president's press secretary.
Any other discussion?
Well, I just think, as Bob pointed out, we're spending a sizable amount of money on this project, and it would seem foolish to me to have the engineering follow it up to the point of construction and then just walk away and kind of us taking responsibility for finishing it out. That for $4,000, that would seem foolish to me. So I would be in favor of having them continue with the project. I had considered maybe putting an amount not to exceed, but I would hate to have, if it had to go to 4,500 in order for them to follow the project all the way through to the end, and
Right.
for that $500, all of a sudden at the very end something gets left out, and there's a mistake made somewhere.
I
So
don't think that, Bill, at $500 not to exceed, I don't think they're gonna walk away, and I don't think we're gonna let them walk away for that. Even though the verbiage says not to exceed. I mean, that's something that's negotiable, I think. When you say,
Yeah.
Bob, not to exceed that, but if we're a couple, 500 over, even 1,000 over, I'm not gonna let them walk away from it. I'll bring it back to the board and say, let's revise it.
yeah,
But I wanna put pressure on to make sure, get the job done,
right, and it's done right.
done right.
Yeah, I would agree.
Any other comments? So I'm looking for a motion.
I'll make the motion that we accept the agreement with Spicer Group not to exceed $4,000 for administration cost.
Support.
Okay, motion by Mr. Gieske, support by Mr. Palmer.
Yes.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Gieske,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes,
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes.
motion is passed.
Okay, the second part of this would be the contract agreement then that the attorney prepared between the township and John Henry. Again, using our standard professional services form.
Any discussion about the contract agreement? If not, we're looking for a motion.
So moved.
Moved by
support
Mr.
that.
Okay, moved by Mr. Byer, supported by Mr. Gieske to go ahead with the contract agreement drawn up by our attorney with John Henry.
Do we have any time frames in this contract with John Henry?
I believe it's got to be done by, I can't remember the exact date, by October, but the schedule that we've established would have it done by Labor Day if things go the way we would like to have them go, frankly.
Okay.
That'd be cool.
Okay, roll call.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes,
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Gieske,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Byer.
Yes.
motion is passed.
Okay, thank you. Another contract discussion, this time involving the 4th of July fireworks. When I had written my report, I expected to receive a communication from our fireworks vendor, and I did. And I had included that in the packet, and then subsequently, a more detailed communication was received, which was on the board table. It was also forwarded to board members. So that would be our reference point for discussion this evening. In short, There was a scenario that played out at the most recent 4th of July fireworks show where time constraints prevented the vendor from launching all the fireworks that we had contracted for. Although the agreement contemplates the vendor being responsible for facilitating the show solely, a request had been made for equipment to be provided by the township, specifically hand carts, to transport the fireworks from the parking lot to the launch site. We did in fact deliver equipment the day of the 4th, but it was deemed less than ideal by the vendor's on-site representative, and that caused a complication and a time delay, ultimately resulting in less than full fireworks show, as again compared to what we contracted for. I had expressed concern on the day of the event, and then I had a subsequent meeting with the principal of the company. They indicated that approximately 30% of the show was not launched, and when we talked, they had indicated they were going to make an offer to essentially make things right from their perspective. Basically, what they're proposing is a 30% discount against the $12,000 invoice, which would mean a payment this year of $8,400, or they would apply that to next year's fireworks show at our discretion. They've also indicated they would add a 30% bonus to the grand finale next year, and essentially have acknowledged that there was a shortcoming in the service and apologized. So that would be the first part of this topic to consider this evening is, do we want to take them up on the offer, and presumably we would, then do we want a credit economically for this year's show or a credit to benefit us next year? And then the second part of this is our contract agreement calls for year-to-year extensions. There are 2 extensions in the agreement, and this would be the first for 2018. So it seemed appropriate to raise that at the same time we were discussing the issue with the complications. So I appreciate feedback from the board also on that. In raising that question, I feel compelled to note that we have generally had good service from this vendor in the past and good experience, and the shows appear to be well received by the public. So that's obviously a value judgment, but on a hearsay basis, I would say that people generally like what they see down there. So.
Did you get any comments at the Township Hall about fireworks seemed a little short this year, or they usually have a big blast of multi fireworks at the very end? That did not occur, I assume. I was not here, but.
Well, they did have a grand finale, actually.
They did?
They did. And I didn't hear anything, but at least one other board member mentioned to me that he received feedback relative to how brief it was.
I was there, and it was really good. Actually, the show was really good. Till the end, there was a weird lull, and you could tell that, like, there was little ones going up, and there probably should have been a lot more going higher or something, and it was a odd lull. So you could tell there was something missing, but then there was still a pretty big grand finale after that. So, and it's my understanding now with the fireworks, it's a little more complicated than just shooting them out of the little canisters. They wire them and do all kinds of things for different times to go off. So I'm assuming that's what the delay was, or why they couldn't get it all wired in time for the show. That's why what happened
Well, basically, they didn't get them all out onto the launch site.
to be able to wire them up.
We didn't have time to wire all of them, so
Okay.
they had to break off the transportation part of it.
Right.
Have they asked for this transportation assistance before?
They have in the past, but we did have an issue a few years ago where one of our employees they were assuming we were going to help. We were not available. We had some people pitch in and volunteer, and that prompted us to change the contract and pay an additional $500, basically to make them responsible. So we're not relying on our own folks being available and/or volunteer assistance.
Well, it seems to me that it was, a bit of a miscommunication on some part. And like you said, all the fireworks I've attended the past couple of years that these folks have put on have been very good. My suggestion would be to pay the reduced invoice this year. These fireworks are always subject to weather conditions. I mean, if something were to happen next year where we couldn't have a fireworks, wouldn't make much sense to apply that credit to something that might not happen next year. So my suggestion would be to, take the reduced invoice this year. I think they're trying to make it up. I think they realize they made a mistake. I think they'll know better next year that they have to have the manpower and the facilities to move the fireworks down to the pier. And they're willing to give us an extra 30% worth of grand finale next year at no extra cost. I think that's a good faith effort, so.
Any other comments?
Bob, if we take the 30% less this year in payment, and they're gonna give us 30% next year, did they indicate anything that if we let that 30% as a credit, that they would give us the 30%, or if we took the reduction this year, would they take that 30% back away for the additional grand finale?
My understanding is we'll get the grand finale enhancement either way.
Either way?
Yes.
Okay.
Any other discussion? I guess we'll take this two parts, probably. Okay, looking for a motion then on how we should handle the discount or the extra 30%?
Well, I would move to apply the credit to this year's invoice of $8,400.
Support.
Okay, motion by Mr. Palmer, support by Mr. Byer, to go ahead and take the credit this year. That will also apply to like Asabel and Friends of the Fireworks if they were going to contribute. They would get a 30% discount then on that whole.
That would be
Total.
the intent, is we
Right.
would, yes, apply it unilaterally to everybody who's participating.
Okay.
But
Roll call, please.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Gieske,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes, Mr. Byer.
Yes.
Okay, extension of the agreement.
Move to extend for 1 year with Great Lakes Fireworks. I think their offer to handle this little error this year is very generous, and so.
Okay, any other discussion? Okay, motion by Mr. Byer, supported by Mr. Gieske to move forward with the extension of the agreement. Roll call, please.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes, Mr. Gieske.
Yes.
Okay, motion is passed.
thank you. Next item is a potential purchase of a 1-ton dual-wheel truck. We solicited bids recently, and this is essentially a truck chassis upon which a dump box would be mounted. We had included in the budget an expenditure of $27,000 to cover this, including the dump box. I had mentioned in a previous superintendent's report that number would appear to be on the low side, but that we saved a significant amount of money on our backhoe purchase earlier this year, which could be, at least from a conceptual standpoint, applied to that overage. Unfortunately, we only received one bid, so I haven't disclosed the bid amount in my report to preserve the option to rebid if the board wishes to do that. And I said in my report that would appear to be the advisable course of action, and that's based upon the benefit of price validation with multiple bids. Certainly, we don't need to do that, but that's the underlying rationale. The board is, however, hopefully in receipt of the singular bid we got by separate communication, and if we wanted to entertain accepting that bid, we could talk about that and then disclose the bidder and the amount this evening if we wanted to move ahead. I should note that there was a question raised at the work session about whether we need a four-wheel drive truck versus a two-wheel drive truck. there has been some discussion at the staff level, and it's the feeling of the folks who would be using the vehicle that the four-wheel drive would be a benefit. I say that not to say that a two-wheel drive is out of the question, but they're sort of sticking by their guns in terms of the benefit of the four-wheel drive for winter burials. So that if we were going to consider a two-wheel drive vehicle, we would probably want to consider rebidding for certain. So that would be another variable that comes to play in this discussion.
Okay, any discussion?
There was 10 bids sent out, Bob?
Yeah.
And
there
we
was a
only
list of
received one.
vendors there, yes.
Anybody else?
Well, I just mentioned at our meeting Friday that I thought the bid we received was a reasonable one based on the equipment that they're describing, a four-wheel drive dual truck with, it has a heavy-duty transmission, a trailering package, a snowplow package, and it's a local dealer. It's a dealer right here in Oscoda. I really wish we could push to have, more incentive for our local vendors to participate in these bids. So the bid that was presented, I thought was a reasonable one based on the information that was in the package. It's $10,000 below the retail price of that vehicle. It's almost $7,000 below the dealer invoice on that vehicle. In my experience, and I've bought a lot of trucks over the years, not this particular size, but for that size of a vehicle with that equipment, that, in my opinion, that's a reasonable price.
I did not bring that document, Bob, with me. Is the one from the local person, is that four-wheel drive? Or
It is.
It is.
Yeah.
Any other discussion or comments?
I agree. If they need a four-wheel drive, they need a four-wheel drive. I was the one that brought up the two-wheel drive. Because I bought a lot of trucks over the years, heavy-duty trucks to light trucks, and, but if they need a four-wheel drive, I guess that's what we'll give them. But I don't think they need it, but they think they need it.
Well, I would just say that if we were gonna look at a two-wheel drive, then we certainly should rebid it, because even the person that put the bid in would have a lower, I would assume, a lower bid if it were not a four-wheel drive vehicle. So, I mean, they're responding to what the request was for.
Right.
And like I said, in my opinion, that's a pretty reasonable price, and it's from our local dealer here. But if it were determined that we only need a two-wheel drive, then we certainly should, put it out for rebids.
No, you can't get a four-wheel drive for less than that.
So,
I agree with that, Bill, but.
yeah, that's a fair price.
Okay, so I'm looking for a motion.
I move we go with the one bid that we did get. Accept that, rather than rebid the whole thing.
I would support that.
Okay, motion by Mr. Byer, supported by Mr. Palmer to accept the single bid that we received. Roll call.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Gieske,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire.
Yes. Motion is passed. Do you need any other discussion with that?
Probably we should note that that was the proposal from Zubek Motor Sales in the amount of $31,000.
So can we amend the motion to include that information?
Yes.
We still have support for that?
Yes.
Okay.
Another item, if they ever need a four-wheel or a plow, we got the truck that'll handle it.
Right? Okay, moving on.
Okay. Property and liability insurance. At about this time of year, each year, although we've been later at times, the subject is raised as to renewal, which takes place at year end, and this would be our property and liability coverages, to provide the opportunity to talk about whether bidding is necessary, because that takes some time, and we don't want to push the envelope in terms of the year end. To sort of frame the discussion, it's been past practice to get some feedback from our agent as to the likely renewal in the upcoming year, and we do have a communication from Mr. Olson indicating that they're not expecting premium increases in 2018. I should note also that we do have a long-standing relationship with the service provider, and it's been, I think, a good one. On the other hand, we have not solicited bids in several years. So based on the fact that the bids haven't been solicited in many years, but that we're looking at no premium increase, I'm looking for feedback from the board as to whether we might want to consider bidding, or we would be happy renewing with our current service provider, premised on the fact that there would be no to minimal increase. And that would be at the board's discretion, obviously.
Discussion.
We've never had a problem with these people over the years.
I would say we've had good experience,
Yeah.
yes, generally.
Wasn't there, Bob, wasn't there a time a few years back where we did bid this out? Now, you said no bids in 7 years, right?
I believe the last time we bid was 2012,
Okay. That's 5 years.
yes.
Yeah. And we ended up with a different company. There was some misunderstanding on the bid specs or something like that with Mr. Olson. And we did end up with another company, and we weren't totally satisfied. Am I right?
I would say that the experience was acceptable, but they proved not to be competitive price-wise in the longer run.
I see.
Yeah.
John, you've been pretty happy with Parkland dealing with?
Absolutely. So far, my experience with him, he's been good to work with.
And I guess the previous thing that we voted on topic here kind of shows you that if you put something out for bid, on this truck, we solicited 10 different auto dealers and got one reply. So doesn't always work as well as you wish. So
Any other comments? It's only been 5 years to me. I think that we could wait a few more. We have a good experience and good rapport with them, so I'm happy staying with Parkland, personally. Looking for a motion, possibly?
I move that we stay with the Mr. Olson and the power plant.
I'll support that. Motion by Mr. Byers, supported by McGuire, to renew with Power Plan.
For 1 year, right?
Yep. Roll call?
Mr. Gasky,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes, Mr. Palmer.
Yes.
Motion is passed.
Okay, next we have the drop-off refuse program, and basically the question here is, do we want to entertain the possibility of another collection event this year? We held an event on June 17th. There were 44 permits sold. Board members might recall that we extended our agreement with Sunrise Disposal to provide the option for an additional event should we deem that to be appropriate. So question one is, do we believe that we should have a second collection event? And then if so, what time frame would the board wish for us to talk to the vendor about?
Discussion?
You sold 45 passes, is that that
Yeah,
the number I
45,
remember?
47, somewhere in there.
Around there? And my understanding, everybody showed up.
Yeah, everybody showed up at least once.
That's amazing to me
That is amazing.
from past
And
experience.
there's I mean, I have to admit, there was a few issues that I think we'll have to iron out in the following drop-off programs. Maybe coordinate a little bit more with Sunrise and John, I think, but nothing that I don't think we can't get past. But it seems like it's definitely picking up in the response that we've got from the first couple ones that we've done,
Yeah, 100% turnout is
right?
amazing.
So is anybody, any other discussion? You want to do it? You want to pick another day?
Well, I would like to see it done a second time this year, sometime after Labor Day, and then compare and see, where we're at for this year. If the second one, we don't get much of any response, then we'll have
Stick
a
to
basis
1
for
year.
next year of, where to go with this. But it was such a well-run, I had a few things to take out there in June, and I think I commented to the board how well it was run and what a good job they did out there. And I think it'd be worth doing a second time just to see what kind of a turnout we get, because if we get the same kind of a turnout, then that's
Right.
trash that isn't getting dumped somewhere in the township.
Right, exactly.
Perhaps, so.
Anybody prefer a certain day?
Is after Labor Day I don't have an opinion, but is after Labor Day a good time, or?
I would think so, because people are closing up their cabins and doing things, or maybe later in the fall, maybe October, maybe even. I
Well,
don't know.
up here,
Doesn't
everybody
matter.
has the garage sales on Labor Day weekend, and so, stuff that's left over, I would think.
They could get rid of that.
That's what happened to me. We had a garage sale, and my wife says, I want this stuff out of here, so. Well, what didn't get sold
Went
out
there.
today.
So what
So
about?
I was looking on the calendar, that would be the 9th. The 9th would be the Saturday after Labor Day, or the 16th would be the following Saturday.
Yeah. Maybe the 9th of September? Or, yeah, September.
When do the leaf and brush exposed drop-offs start?
Oh, you know what? Maybe the 16th then, because that's the second Saturday of each month. So the 9th would be the second Saturday.
When do they start again? Every weekend in the fall? Do you know?
After October.
Okay.
Would the two really conflict?
Yeah, because it's the same guy running both.
I see.
Yeah, can't be
That's
split
a
up.
compromise problem.
And he's still doing boat launches too.
Yeah.
So probably the 16th. Do you need a motion, or is that just a guidance?
Probably wouldn't hurt to have a motion, and then I'll bring something back once we talk to Sunrise.
Okay. So, anybody want to make a motion?
I would move that we have a second refuse collection on September 16th with Sunrise Refuse.
I'll support that. Motion by Mr. Palmer, supported by McGuire, to set up a second drop-off program on September 16th. Roll call?
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Gieske,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes.
Motion is passed.
Thank you. Last item is informational, and that involves a cost estimate to extend cable service, and primarily the intent here is internet, to Old Orchard Park from Charter Communications. We had sought the estimate in keeping with work session discussion and specifically our goals and objectives to enhance technology and service at the park. The estimate is $30,256.68. Again, it's informational this evening, and my assumption would be we would talk about this in relation to budget preparation in 2018, although it's not in the capital improvement plan now. It could be plugged in. However, if board members have specific questions or would like additional information regarding this quote or this topic, please let us know and we'll try to get it.
A question right now, would users of the park have to apply for use of this? And if the answer is yes to that, versus it being wide open to everybody, anybody that wants to use it. Is there a way that we can add to the cost to have a modest fee for use of internet connection?
This is just to get the service on premises. So
Yes, I
then there
understand.
would be cost as to distributing the signal and that kind of thing. The discussion during the work session was that we should try to make it available. We'll have to look at the cost and feasibility, et cetera. And that maybe the easiest way to deal with that would be adjusting camping fees themselves because we've enhanced the experience. But that's all subject to discussion.
Okay. You or Mr. Al Apsitas have any kind of reaction to that figure? Is it about what you expected, or are you alarmed by it, or?
I wouldn't say alarmed. It's not an insignificant amount of money, but it also has the potential to benefit not only the campers, but the operation in terms of a digitized registration program and that kind of thing. So
Okay.
And store.
there are benefits beyond just making it available for customer consumption.
Well, in our goals and objectives, one of those was to improve the registration process for Old Orchard Park, and this would be correct me if I'm wrong, but this would be a step in that direction.
It definitely would be.
Big step.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to the Community Development Coordinator.
Thank you. The topic is MEDC Redevelopment Ready Communities, or RRC. A few years ago, the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, also known as MEDC, developed a program entitled Redevelopment Ready Communities, RRC program. The goal behind the program is to work with Michigan communities seeking to streamline the development approval process by integrating transparency, predictability, and efficiency into daily development practices. Through RRC, communities commit to undergo an assessment and work to achieve a set of criteria as outlined in the RRC best practices. According to MEDC, the RRC best practices were developed by public and private sector experts and are the standard for evaluations. Each best practice addresses key elements of the community and economic development. Evaluations are conducted by RRC's team through interviews, observation, and data analysis. RRC is designed in a way that lets the communities move towards certification at their own pace. There's no required drop-dead date for reaching that certification. That being said, beginning on October 1st of this year, engagement in RRC will be used to prioritize MEDC community development incentives or grants that the Township and Downtown Development Authority will have access to. According to MEDC, since Oscoda has a traditional downtown, we only need to be engaged and in good standing, which basically means that we're moving towards the certification process. The Downtown Development Authority and the Planning Commission discussed this program in 2015, but to the best of my knowledge, we did not discuss this at a township board level. The program has undergone some changes since inception, including revisions to the best practice modules. Supposedly they simplified them, I'm not sure, but they said they simplified them. Education requirements and the need for the community to adopt a resolution to state the commitment to move towards RRC certification. This evening, I am seeking approval from the board to initiate the process to become an RRC community. And if the board is in agreement with moving forward with that process, it would be my intent to bring back a resolution at the August 14th meeting for you to consider adopting.
Okay, any discussion?
Who would be included in this process, and what people on staff and boards and that sort of thing would be involved?
You mean in filling out the different components?
Yes.
It's a little bit of everybody. The planning commission, staff, and the board as a whole would sit down and look at the best practices. If there was certain questions that's between myself and Lorna we couldn't address, then we'd be looking back to the board for some of those answers.
So then, who actually gets the certification? Is it individuals, or
It's
is it
the township, the township itself would be certified as a redevelopment ready community.
the township
Yes,
itself?
the township
Okay.
itself.
Okay.
Because it's not just, when we first looked at it, we looked at it from the DDA standpoint, but it's really not a DDA driven. I mean, a lot of the the programs are in the downtown, but the controls are all really with the planning commission ordinances, you know, and so on, which we, the DDA, do not have any control over. So it's kind of a
So
whole township-wide philosophy, and actually involves the community as well, so.
right.
What are these education requirements?
The education is training. Basically, just somebody within the community has to go for the training. There's no charge for the training, but you have the hotel room if you have to stay overnight, which I have actually registered for the training in Grand Rapids. It's a 2-day, August 9th and 10th. I could cancel if the board decided we weren't interested in going forward with the RRC, but basically one person has to go through the training. So in theory, if the board accepts or decides to move forward tonight, I'm set up for the training. I'll get the training through the modules and that component will be done. So
Can more than one person go to this training?
they could if they wanted. We did, Lorna and I talked about it, but she had some conflicts where I don't think that she'd be coming from a planning commission standpoint. And there's other classes, and there's not just that one. You could go at any time to the other classes as well. They're all on the website that have the other classes that are available. Some are just, there's 6 components, so some have the training of just 1 through 3 on one day, and then, and then it's a couple months later, and you could have the other 3. So, but I'm just doing the back-to-backs to get it kind of done all at once.
Any other questions? Discussion?
You or Bob have looked into this, I'm assuming to a considerable degree. Are there any downsides, obligations that are particularly onerous to be a member of this RRC?
Well, it's kind of it's helping you be more user-friendly to a developer coming to your community. So, hopefully, I think a lot of the things we've already done, or we already have in place. I mean, we have plans, we have capital improvement plan, we have, the master plan and DDA plan. It's just making sure that all of them work together, and don't conflict each other. So I've looked at the modules. I don't think there's anything that's going to be too difficult for us to, but I guess I'm not 101% in regard to the planning commission, all the different ins and outs there. So I guess we'll see when we dive into that module a little bit more.
But having the certification would be a bonus in applying for grants and that sort of thing.
Well, they're basically, as of October 1st, if you are an RRC community, they're going to give you points for that, and because they're all competitive grants, so they're gonna that's gonna weigh in on that. And then they've changed the RRC component where MEDC can play a more aggressive role at the beginning. If you identify a project, like an anchor project that you want to have done, they can bring more to the table for evaluating that project, bringing some financial resources to it as well. Even for, design or evaluation of what the needs could be for that building. Say we targeted a certain building in town and, do a evaluation of it on whether or not a feasibility study, basically. And they could bring the dollars to do that, which could save us, thousands of dollars instead of having to hire somebody. So they almost, the way Dan explained it to me, Dan Leonard, he's our MEDC person, is they're taking a more aggressive role in those redevelopment ready communities and acting a little bit, I don't want to call them a developer, but a little bit like a construction manager almost, and helping the community facilitate that. So definitely more perks
Yeah,
at no charge. So
even better.
which we like, yeah. Right.
Okay, any further discussion? If not, I'd be looking for a motion.
I would move to approve going forward with the initiating the process of becoming an RRC community.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Palmer, support by Mr. Byer. Roll call?
Mr. Nordine, yes. Ms. McGuire?
Yes.
Mr. Byer?
Yes.
Mr. Palmer?
Yes.
Mr. Gieske?
Yes.
Motion is passed. Next item.
Okay, sorry. I'm used to Mr. Weed says
Oh,
the title.
the topic.
So I'm
Sorry.
waiting
That's
for
why
that
you and
and
Bob
then-
keep looking at me like that.
Right, kinda,
Okay. Sorry.
You're throwing us off, Jamie. Okay. Just kidding. Ani Medical Veterans Administration is the topic. So, at the March 27th meeting, the board approved a renovation project in the Veterans Affairs Suite, which is located within the Ani Medical facility. As you might recall, that was basically adding magnetic holders to the doors so that they could stay open without being propped open, and that would still properly close if there were a fire. So that was what the project involved. So the work was completed over the weekend of July 14th, and on Wednesday, July 19th, a representative from the VA, myself and Randy from J.E. Johnson did go through and inspect the project. The county electrical inspector had been scheduled for that same day, but unfortunately had to reschedule. The work performed by the contractor was very neat. You actually couldn't even tell that it had been done and that the modifications had been made. And he was able to manually, he being Randy, was able to manually pull hit the switch, which then showed all, I can't remember if there was 13 doors, anyways, all the doors closed, at once and were released. So that was good. The VA person was satisfied with all the work that was done. And was, very happy, as were all the employees who were complaining basically that the doors were kind of heavy and, awkward to pop open and stuff. So everybody was happy with that. So this evening, I'm seeking approval to pay the contractor once the county has actually inspected the work and signed off on the permit. So it's just we don't have a meeting for another 3 weeks, and I didn't want to hold up that process. And then, as you will recall, we will be reimbursed 100% from the VA. They had issued a PO for the project, so it might even happen simultaneously. We might, we might get the check we could pay them and be reimbursed within a couple days. I expect it to happen fairly soon. But I would not authorize payment until we've received sign off from the county inspector.
Sounds like a no-brainer to me. Move to approve to pay the contractor once the county has approved the final inspection.
Support.
Moved by Mr. Byer, supported by Mr. Palmer. Roll call.
Mr. Gasky,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Motion is passed. Under other.
We recently received a letter from the first responders, which is in the packet, from a certified internal auditor. And the letter is intended to be responsive to the requirement in the contract agreement, which is also in the packet, that essentially says an annual audit by an independent auditor must be provided to ensure accountability. A question emerged when we got the letter as to whether that particular approach satisfied the intent of the contract agreement. And I had spoken with our auditor, and there is a difference between a certified internal auditor and a certified public accountant from a standpoint of, to some extent, training and the job they do. So we talked about this a little bit during the work session, and a few questions were posed of the first responders regarding the potential for the gentleman in question having insurance coverage available and specific accounting of his qualifications. I don't have anything to report in that regard. I've not gotten any feedback. But basically, the question for the board at this point is, we have the letter, we have the contract language. Do we consider what we received to be satisfactory response to that contract requirement? And we're working in shades of gray here to some extent, frankly. There's no absolute right or wrong answer. Historically, the first responders have indicated some concern about the cost of a bona fide audit. And I think this is their attempt to minimize that so that they can use the resources that they're provided to a greater extent to give service to the community. So that's sort of the balance we're working with here.
Comments, discussion? After speaking with Bob today about this, I know David Brick, actually, and he used to be a part of the yacht club when I worked there, and I made a few phone calls after work today, and he does do this type of work. Whether he has certification or insurance, not sure about that, but yeah, he's definitely does this type of work, so I don't see a reason why not to press him just to get some type of verification.
So what you're saying is he is
He has a history of doing this. I'm sure he's probably
Yeah.
retired and just doing this,
but we should press him for a little more detail.
just a little more detail. I
Okay.
mean,
All right. And we have time for that?
We do. It's totally at our discretion. So,
Okay.
just if that's what we were requesting in the information.
okay.
Anybody else?
I don't see any problem waiting, getting the answers
No.
to the questions we asked.
Yeah, the only concern I had was that the auditor spoke specifically about this particular thing and that it is a critical, kind of a critical issue. So I think a little more information on this would be helpful.
Right.
I don't know what the alternative is if the information we get isn't adequate. You know,
Then they would have to find somebody to audit them.
Right, it would be essentially demanding a certified public accountant review the books and give us a formal report.
and that would raise havoc with their budget, I believe.
I think that is the underlying concern, yes.
Do you need a motion, or is that input's
We-
good?
if We could just set it aside and bring it back when we
Yeah.
have the information.
Why don't we do that?
That's- Okay.
Okay. Number 2.
Okay. We have a letter from the Chamber of Commerce asking whether the township would be amenable to a hospitality tent being operated in conjunction with Paul Bunyan festivities at Furtaw Field. That would be on September 22nd and September 23rd from 6 to 10 p.m. And presumably, if we were going to evaluate the request favorably, it would be contingent on provision of liquor liability insurance coverage, which is, I believe, the same approach we took last year.
We'll go ahead and cover that, but you skipped the garage sale permitting
Oh, I'm
one.
sorry.
That's why saying.
That's
the
why I was supposed to
subject
do the
is
topic. I'm
helpful.
sorry.
Yeah.
They're just asking for permission to have it. They're gonna provide insurance, the chamber.
Yeah. Yes.
That's another no-brainer, so I'll make a motion that we approve their request.
I'll support that.
Is that why we're all on the board? Is the no-brainers?
Yeah.
Is that weird?
No, but I'll take the easy ones. How about that? Just kidding. Motion by McGuire, supported by Gajewski.
I have a comment
Oh,
or a
sorry.
question real quick, no problem. You volunteered at the Paul Bunyan Festival last year,
I
correct?
did,
Yeah,
mhm.
how did it go?
It was good. They had a good turnout.
Yeah.
They had a great band, and it was a little slow starting, but towards it got darker. There was people there with their older kids. The kids were all riding the rides and having a great time, and their parents were in there listening to the band and hanging out, and it was very well attended.
Yeah, I worked at the gate, and I think it was I think they made the decision later last year than this year. So they'll be able to advertise, I mean, if the board approves it, they'd be able to advertise it earlier and promote it a little bit more. But it did do better than I thought it would for I hate to call it last minute, but a little bit of last minute addition.
And everything was on the up and up, everyone behaved themselves?
Everybody behaved themselves. Yep, I didn't have a problem with anybody. We had a snow fence around the whole thing, and we had somebody checking IDs, 2 people checking IDs when they came in, and yeah, it worked out real well.
Yeah, awesome.
Oh, so, yeah, roll call.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
I keep forgetting I'm
Mr.
running this.
Gajewski,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes.
Motion's passed. Now we'll go back to number 2. Garage sale permitting process.
Yes, so that was a topic that our township supervisor had asked that we put on the agenda specifically, so my suggestion there is we set that aside until
Okay.
Mr. Weed's able to attend.
Okay, sounds fine with me. If that's okay with everybody else. Okay. Public comment, our second public comment period. You have 4 minutes, no card necessary. So go ahead, Bob. Please state your name and your address.
Robert Tazer, Hillcrest Drive, Oscoda. I just have a question about, tonight you talked about running a internet service out to Old Orchard. And I was wondering if that is considered, my understanding is that through Spectrum that they want to run a fiber optic cable out there. Is that what we're talking about here?
I don't believe so, but
No?
I'm not certain of exactly what you're referring to, so.
Well, they said they want to run internet service out to Old Orchard Park, and that's what's been under discussion. And one way they do that is through a fiber optic cable service, or through, like they use in the rest of the township, you see the cables hanging on the poles. I would just like to point out, if that is the methods that they are talking about using, that there are other benefits to having fiber optic cable running out there. My question also would be, who would own it if we're paying for it to be out there? Who owns the cable? Would that be something that cable service would own that cable? My question for that is because fiber optic cable can be used for many other things besides just going out to Old Orchard. They can use that for small cell phone towers for customers all along the way. They can use that for people hooking into it all the way out there. So that was what my basic question was. To get that internet service out there, are we talking about a fiber optic cable? And if we are paying the amount to run it out there, does that mean a township owns it?
Well, I would be speculating, but I think the ownership is probably not likely, because they probably would like to expand their network in that area.
So they're running costs for that also, because they're getting the benefit.
Right.
They're getting the proceeds for it, and we're paying the money to get it out there. If that's the
'Cause
way
we
it
need
works.
it.
So if that's the case, then we should also be able to hook into that for other services then, like phone services, like Wi-Fi services for homes that can't get broadband or whatever, or, so that was what my question is. I guess I'm bringing that out because if we're putting out a great expensive money to get it out there, maybe we should look at that contract and see what else we can use it for on the way out there.
Right.
Right.
And when you use that, by the way, the franchise fees that they're talking about, I would hope that the board would look into putting some of that money into further running fiber optic out, maybe all the way to the end of our township, so everybody could benefit. That's, I think, what part of franchise fees should go for, the benefit of everybody, even though it is a privilege to have a service like internet. It's not mandatory, everybody has these things, and they pay for it. I mean, so it's a privilege, you're buying it, but not everybody has the privilege to get it.
Right.
Do you have any idea of the services available to the people that live in what is called Silver Sands area?
One of the biggest problems in our whole township would be a cell phone. There's areas that you just can't get service in, period.
Yeah.
Well, there's new technology now that allows you to go from tower to tower, and these towers may be a mile apart. In which, by the way, we're looking at writing something to franchise that also. Okay, but that's what, there's services that are allowed that you could hook into a fiber optic, and people would have cell service. Your cell phone would hit that tower instead of trying a weak signal that's 4 miles away.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bob.
Thanks.
Anybody else?
Mark Miller. I live on First Street in Oscoda. I've got about 4 areas. First thing, the 30K estimate from Charter. Did you talk to any other providers?
We have not at this point.
Okay, I strongly recommend you talk to Tom Stephenson. There's a variety of cables running down River Road. And going back to the campsite, when I threw that out this spring, I guess my initial option, and it's up to the board to decide, is you give the campsitees the option of buying a day pass, week pass, season pass. As an ex-PricewaterhouseCoopers auditor regarding the CIA certified internal auditor, that's basically designed for large corporations, and I think you need to defer to your external CPAs whether the person who did the report has the proper work experience. On MEDC, I'd be interested in participating. However, I'm going to be at a Midwest Railroad conference that week. And the last thing, in the future, I think you need to go out for bids with your vendors every 3 to 5 years, and that's going to minimize an audit comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, board comments. Anybody? Wow, okay. Then I guess I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay, we're adjourned.